Welcome to another VC Wisdom Pod with Keat, ippel. Keat is co-leading Spring Impact Capital, Spring Activator, and Spring Investing Collective. So we're going to talk about angel investing, raising capital, VC, and impact investing today, which is one of my favorite topics. This pod is brought to you by my podcasting company. It's called podfire.com. If you want to start your podcast and monetize the unconventional way, you can go to podfire.com. Keat, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays.
Yeah, Charles, great to be here. Thanks for having me on. I co-lead and co-founded Spring Activator, and Spring exists to change the world through innovation. We love to work at the intersection of early stage impact entrepreneurship and early stage impact capital. And we do that by providing training and capacity building for those impact founders. And then what we do is we bring them together with impact investors. On that side, we do a lot of training, capacity building, convening for those investors. As you said, we also have a national impact investor network called the Spring Collective, and we have an early stage impact fund, Spring Impact Capital, that's focused at the intersection of clean tech and health tech.
Tell me a bit more about your background, because you've been through the dot-com boom and bust. You've been president, founder of various technology companies. Tell me about your background and what led you to the VC world.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So, I've had the good fortune of being a serial entrepreneur. I got involved in the tech sector back in '99, and increasingly more senior roles within. And then I became a CEO for the first time in 2005. From there, helped co-found a couple of businesses. And through that process, saw a variety of exits. And I also started to advise other companies on raising capital, because up to that point, I had raised about 15 million in early stage capital into my own ventures. And so that was really the time where I started to get exposed to that full diversity of startups and ideas and organizations, but always at that intersection of, kind of the entrepreneur and the capital. And so for me, I really saw just the massive impact and leverage that can happen at that intersection. For me, the transition point was 2010, where really I saw an opportunity to step into that world specifically to try and make the world a better place. And so let's call that impact plus tech. And then from there, helped with a couple of friends to launch a venture studio. And that then led eventually to the launch of Spring Activator back in 2014. And so for me, becoming an advisor, becoming an angel investor really helped me to see the impact that I could have at scale, right? Touching on multiple organizations, multiple companies, each one creating their own impact. But what I did see was that there was a real lack of early stage pre-seed to seed capital at the venture level for impact organizations. And that really drove us into venture capital. And so for me, it was not a dream. It was not something that I felt that I needed to do. It was actually something that I felt was important to respond to the need of the market, the customer. And the customer in this case being the early stage ventures on one side and the LPs on the other.
Why impact investing? Because you could have gone the classic VC way or the SoftBank way and just find out, like the next unicorn and invest crap ton of money into some companies that have huge potential, super ambitious founders. Why have impact in that philosophy?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first, I think we live in a time and a place where I think we would all acknowledge that we need to make the world a better place, right? And this is both for people and for planets. And we can all set aside the debate about like how it started, who's creating, what kind of percentage impact on the planet, et cetera. But at the end of the day, we all agree that, the planet is hot, it's unpredictable. You and I were talking about the weather before we got in here. And so there's a huge opportunity and a huge need, right? So for climate solutions, for sustainable food and agriculture, for improved methods of healthcare coming out of COVID. It was not just COVID response; it was mental health response. It was health and wellness response. Starting to also recognize things that we can see that, for example, certain categories like mental health, femtech, and women's health are underfunded. but huge opportunities with huge challenges that can be overcome with innovation. And so for me, it's a combination of two things. One is what can we do as society to kind of drive positive change? But the second one is to actually unearth incredible economic opportunities at the same time. And so our belief is that you can actually invest for ROI squared, return on investment and return on impact. And so our fund exists to help prove that.
The top problem, the top problems that this world is facing, in your opinion, is it based on the UN resolutions, or is it like an ikigai of the problems you're facing in your own communities? What are the top problems in your opinion, like women in tech, sure, so diversity? What about climate change? What about war? You know, like we're seeing Ukraine blow up right now, Hamas and Israel. So what top problems are you seeing in this world, and what startups are you investing precisely that are solving these problems?
Great question. Such an important question that I think from my perspective, there's a few things. Like first, you mentioned UN SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. And what I like about them is that it actually creates a common language upon which we can talk about the problems and opportunities that exist. Human nature is we like to label things. And so UN SDGs is a great way to do that. Now, from my perspective, climate uncertainty is a massive challenge. It's probably, like, from a human survival perspective, it's probably the single greatest challenge that we have, right? And so this is a rapidly changing climate that it's very hard for us to adapt to. In addition to that, we also have, you know, questions around how do we have a sustainable food ecosystem? How do we actually have access to clean drinking water for the planet, right? Like these are big, big burning questions. And these are questions that need to get solved. And so what's interesting and what's really important is that you're touching on the second main category, which is the societal impact. And societal impact for me is actually a very important key component, because we actually live in a world right now where innovation and technology is moving at light speed. But one of the greatest challenges is that the public sector cannot innovate that fast. So this is everything from rules and regulations. So for example, we've heard, you know, you and I, it turned of the 20th century, 1900, 1920, people were like, well, maybe we need to regulate cars because, you know, there was no rules, right? And so now we're starting to hear people have conversations about, should we regulate AI? But the challenge is that the government systems can't adapt fast enough. And so that has a huge cascade effect, because it impacts things like what is done in technology, but also then how technology is applied and how government is or is not able to react. So one of the great challenges that we see in the world today, and you mentioned the Ukraine, we could talk about the Middle East. There's other areas of conflict in the world. Part of it is driven because technology has moved so fast, but government hasn't been able to move fast enough, or society hasn't been able to move fast enough to help create the right sandbox to play in. And I think that is the great challenge. Now, in our particular case, based on our experience and expertise, we do focus on climate and health, because, you know, if we do well with the climate, we will help to solve a lot of health problems at the same time. That's our area of expertise. But I do think it's equally critical that we deal with those societal challenges and like, you know, I call it reg tech, right? Like how do we help governments to innovate in a way that increases transparency, trust, accountability, that actually can help ultimately to solve some of these larger societal challenges, you know, and you mentioned several of them. So I will say there's a crosscut that everybody needs to touch on, which is, you know, equality and equity, right? So doesn't matter what sector you're in, it doesn't matter whether you're playing on the entrepreneur side or the investor side, you know, creating an equitable planet is pivotal for us to create a better planet. And so creating access for opportunities for underrepresented founders, creating opportunities for underrepresented team members, creating access to opportunities for underrepresented people to invest, That's how we move the dial across the ecosystem, and I think ultimately can help us really solve a lot of the challenges that exist.
In Canada, it seems that we're pretty advanced in a lot of field and pretty much of an example, certainly in terms of immigration when you compare to our US neighbors. Well, we don't share a border with Mexico, so that's like a geographic thing, but it seems that a bunch of folks in the US have it totally backwards when it comes to immigration. So what are our strengths in Canada uh, in which like the startup community can take example or on a politic level, and what are our weaknesses? What would you change?
So I personally think that Canada is poised to become a leader in innovation and impact, in part because, for example, you talked about immigration. Like, Canada is a very unique place right now. We are very immigration friendly, and it is that diversity, that breadth and depth of education, experience, wisdom, culture, context that actually makes Canada as amazing as it is today. Um, and so from my perspective, there's a few things that then I think need to come. One is I think Canada needs to double down on that. But when I say that, I don't just mean numbers of people. Canada actually needs to step in and actually, from an infrastructure perspective, historically, we think about federal government as like roads or healthcare. Sure. And I agree with those. But actually, what I think the government needs to do is they need to step in and actually help to solve some of the problems around housing and infrastructure pieces that actually will make it work. And so, interestingly enough, it's not rocket science. At the end of World War II, we literally had tens of thousands of soldiers coming back. And when those soldiers came back, they were either already married or they had gotten engaged or they were about to get married, right? Because they were all young, like 18 to 25 was the average age. So one of the things that the government fueled was they fueled what they called war homes. So across the country, these small, very easily, quickly built homes that actually would allow a quick growth in community and related infrastructure to allow all of those men to come back, all those soldiers, men and women, to actually then get established, set up their homes, get married, have kids, do the things that they were planning on doing. And so we need the same. If we're bringing 500,000 people into Canada, the benefit for us is not only do we know what we need to do, but we actually know the numbers. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like we're guessing how many people are coming. Like, we have a target. If it's 500,000 people, then we know we need to make sure there's 500,000 homes in a way that actually allows for affordability for everyone, existing Canadians, permanent residents, as well as the newcomers, right? And so I think for me, that's probably job one for the government. I do think, as a side note, there's huge opportunity around catalyzing what I would call microcredentialing. We have doctors, dentists, engineers, people coming from other countries who have amazing skills and abilities. And if we can create micro-credentialing that allows them to get up to speed quickly and then step into their career path, as opposed to necessarily becoming, taxi drivers or laborers, even though they're PhDs in their field, that would be a way for us to really catalyze impact further. Yeah.
You feel that there's an ROI in impact investing over the long term? Sometimes I feel that people that are cutting corners and going too much on the testosterone side might self-burn themselves. They might earn a lot on the short term, but long term they will burn out. While people that go more for long term and for scale tend to win way more over the long term, even from a financial perspective. What do you think about that?
Yeah. The most respected organizations that exist in innovation are organizations that have existed for a long time, right? You and I think about companies like Apple Computer, Microsoft, and others. I mean, these are not 3-year-old organizations. And so I agree with you. We do need to have patient capital. What's interesting is that the average venture capital fund, and Spring Impact Capital is in the same category, they're built on 10-year models. they're not built on 3-year models. Like, we assume that we need to lean in hard for 10 years to help the organizations that we're investing to create that firm foundation upon which they will then continue to thrive. And so what's interesting is that this idea of, like, kind of rapid growth is cool, and it's kind of Dragon's Den-y, and it makes for great social media. But at the end of the day, those first couple of years of a venture, there's a lot of changes, there's a lot of adaptation, and we're really in it to see that return expand over 10 years. And so from my perspective, I agree with you. Like, we as funders, and I'll use Spring Impact Capital as an example, we have a very strong wraparound support model, not only for the ventures, but also the founders. And that's really critical to help them get there over time, over this 10-year life. And just as an aside, there's other funds that do an amazing job of that as well. Spring Impact Capital being one, Active Impact Investments, which is Canada's largest climate fund, is another great example of that. And so I think, when startups are looking for financial partners, they should be looking for that. And I think when investors are looking to either co-invest with a fund or invest in a fund, that's what they should be looking for.
You certainly feel better with yourself, especially later on in your life when you're just like sitting on your porch and enjoying a beautiful view of nature. If you haven't burned the nature in the process, or if you haven't contributed to torturing and killing or raping of human beings. But I feel a lot of people that go 100% on the wealth side of things, they just they don't have a heart anymore. And I've experienced that in myself, like a lack of empathy and just full testosterone and blocking out, the heart noise, like the Grinch sort of. So how do we get these people to change mindset? Is it just by appealing to what they know, aka like tell them like, hey, if you do that, your wallet is going to be diminished as a result if they don't give a crap about burning the planet and so forth. How do we get folks at the top of the society scale, the wealth game, to think differently and think in a more scalable and holistic way?
Yeah, Charles, you are really hitting at a core, at it, I would argue the core question, which is, it doesn't matter if a person is the wealthiest person in the world, or they're leading a corporate venture capital fund, or they're an entrepreneur, or anything in between. They are human beings. And so we need to meet them at the human level. And so this is really where we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And Maslow's hierarchy of needs always starts with food and shelter. And then it elevates from there. And we need to be able to meet people where they are. And so to your point, one thing that I think is very important is that we need to take this in effect as a 1-2 punch, right? And you never throw one punch, you always throw two. And the first punch is a quant punch. There's a way for you to invest for impact and have financial returns. So in other words, you will keep your house, you will keep food on the table. But with that punch, you then talk about the storytelling. Look at these organizations that have really moved the dial on impact, and how can you help them to do that, or how can you emulate them? Who are the amazing founders? Who are the amazing investors that are really moving the dial? So people can say, oh, I could be like them. I'm inspired by that. I can relate to it. I'm like them. And then the third component is to actually show them how. Because the toughest question actually for humans is, how do I? Right? It would be like, how do I change a flat tire? How do I make pasta? Like, the first time we ask these questions, it's kind of like, yay, how do I do it? And there's not a lot of YouTube videos on scaling finance in this way. And so we need to be able to show people how. Because if they say, yeah, like, look, I intellectually, I believe that I can gain financially as well as have impact, and I'm inspired and I can relate to these stories, if we then answer the third question, which is, oh, and now I know exactly how to get started or how to build on it, then we can start to move the dial. But if we think about it only in one of those categories, like if we only show them how, they don't know about the why and they don't know about the outcome. If we show them the outcome, but they don't know how, they're never going to get started, right? So it's kind of like weight loss, right? Like, if somebody is told that they need to lose weight by their doctor, or they're told they need to change their lifestyle because they had a heart attack, most people do nothing. Why? Because they've been told the impact, but they haven't been told why, and they haven't been told how. So we need to do all three well.
Because it seems some shapeshifters, some trailblazers get demonized nowadays. I mean, Einstein, he invented, well, contributed to the invention of the atomic bomb. Musk wants to save the planet, but gets a lot of hate. Even Bill Gates gets demonized nowadays with the the anti-vaxxers or whatever they stand for. Um, so how are these people still useful? Like, are rebels or people that have great capabilities, great energy, and the potential to have huge impact on this planet? Do they have a good impact? Because most of the time it's self-serving. It's like drives, it's testosterone most of the time. So how do we take that and have a scalable backend to that? Is it just like, oh, I'm checking the environment box and I can keep on achieving, inventing, and making billions? Is is it like, is there a self-equilibrium mechanism in there, an accountability system in which if these folks go too much in a direction, people are going to tell them, people close to them are going to tell them, and they're going to invest more? There was like 10
Yeah.
questions in there, but what do you think about some of these points?
Yeah, but there's a constant theme there, right? Which, like I'm going to make a comment, which is we as humans, we tend towards idol worship, right? And so whether we're worshiping Taylor Swift or we're worshiping the Kansas City Chiefs or we're worshiping Elon Musk, it's the way we do it. It's human nature. So if we want to move the dial and impact, the key is to not focus on a single idol, but many, right? And so the key is to never tell one story. We never want to tell one impact investor story or one impact entrepreneur story. We want to talk about 3, 4, 6. And the reason for that is because human nature as well, both individually and as companies and organizations, is we run the risk of stumbling from time to time. So that is inevitable. There's nothing wrong with that. But when we only focus on one, then when they stumble, everybody points and says, see, the whole thing is a problem. So that's why we actually need to actually create these role models and case studies that are multiples, so that we as people, we can relate to the ones that we relate to, but we see multiple. For example, that's actually one of the reasons why TED can be so powerful, or the B Corp community can be so powerful, because there's not one TED Talk, right? And so there's an ability to see a whole range of amazing people, many of which are creating massive impact, right? Same thing with B Corps, right? I'm not just focused on Ben and Jerry's. I'm also looking at, Fiasco Gelato, and I'm looking at BDC, and I'm looking, like Junction Strategy. And so we look at many of them, and that also insulates us when they stumble. And that's important. Yeah.
Developed a lot of neurons today, Keith. Thank you for that. Where can people find out more about you?
Spring.is would be fantastic. Or if you want to go onto LinkedIn, Keith Ippel. There's only 2 Keith Ippels in the world. The other one is my dad. You can always say hi to him too. But otherwise, Keith, Spring.is or Keith Ippel on LinkedIn.